Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we'll be continuing our calculus series with a look at infinite limits and limits that do not exist. Our first example today is to find the limit of f of x as x approaches -1, and f of x is quantity 4x plus 3 over quantity x plus 1. So let's use our three steps, starting with step 1. Which you will recall was to plug in. So the limit as x approaches -1 of f of x would be 4 times -1 plus 3 over -1 plus 1, which works out to be -1 over 0. This is not finite, so we know nothing at this point. Let's move on to step 2, where we'll look for factors to cancel top and bottom, holes in our function. So this is to factor and cancel. There are no factors on the top or the bottom, so we'll move on to step 3. Because we are at step 3, we know the limit is -infinity, +infinity, or the limit does not exist. So how do we determine which of those is true? Let's take a look at our one-sided limits, starting with the left side limit, or the limit as x approaches -1 from the left of f of x. First, let's look at what that behavior looks like as x approaches -1 from the left. Let's pick a value less than -1, but pretty close to -1. Maybe -1.1. So -1.1 is less than -1 and pretty close. Now let's move closer. And closer. So we're going to move closer and closer, infinitesimally close to -1 from values that are less than -1. So what's this look like in our limit? So this is going to be 4, and I'm going to go ahead and just plug -1 in there because that's going to give us a constant. -4 times -1 plus 3, or -1. Now we're going to plug in x is close to -1 into the denominator and add 1 to those. So this is going to be a negative, this number, no matter how close we get to -1, as long as we're less than -1, we're going to be a bigger negative than the positive. So that's going to be a negative, something that's really close to 0. So here we have -1 over a negative, something very close to 0. That's a positive infinity. Now on to the right side limit, or the limit as x approaches -1 from the right. And let's look at that behavior. So x is going to be coming towards -1 from the right, or values that are greater than -1. Negatives always feel a little bit awkward. And so we get a little closer to -1, and so on. So you can see that our values, even though they're negative, that are approaching -1, are greater than -1. So our limit, it's going to be -1 again on the top, but on the bottom we're going to have a positive, something that's very close to 0. So that's a negative over a positive, and the denominator is approaching 0, so that's going to be a negative infinity. Now, since our left side limit does not equal our right side limit, our overall limit does not exist. Now let's take a look at the graph. We can see, looking at the graph here, that as the x values approach -1 from the left, our limit is heading off towards positive infinity, and as we approach -1 from the right side, our limit is heading off towards negative infinity. Thanks for being here today, and I hope you join me on future episodes.